This month's Where'd the Road Go is sponsored by 4 awesome people: Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Indrid Cold, and 36 Dingo. If you want to become a patron, www.where'dtheroadgo.com. And now our show.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And tonight I am joined by Mr. Christopher Ernst.
Hey, everybody.
And Red Pill Junkie.
Hey, you guys.
I'm glad to hear your voice more, Red Pill.
The best voice of all of us.
Because there was a while there where I rarely heard from you. So it's like you were doing a tarot deck or something.
Yeah, I was incommunicado.
So tonight, for the first time in the 10-year history of the show, I believe, we are going to talk in depth about Roswell.
Oh, boy.
A subject I normally veer far away from. But so I've kind of put the autobiography on like the second, kind of secondary for the moment, because I want to get this book done. As I was trying to explain it to Red Pill, it's sort of the anti-theory of everything. So it's like looking at paranormal phenomena from every possible angle, because there's so many things that can cause the same type of phenomena to occur. Right. And I was working on the chapter on UFOs, and I mean, the thing about any data set is that you have to eliminate the stuff that is not part of that data set. And as far as I'm concerned, Roswell is not part of the UFO data set as a legitimate paranormal phenomenon. And I wrote a chapter about why, and I referenced Nick Redfern's book, Body Snatchers in the Desert, but I had never read it. And I was like, I have that. I picked it up a few months ago at a used bookstore for like $2. Maybe I'll flip through it. And I powered through the whole thing in like 2 days.
Yeah.
And it's probably the best Nick Redfern book I've read. And, he writes good books. That's not a issue with his other stuff. It's just the fact that it was Roswell and it kept me interested.
That's surprising. Yeah. Right.
So, and it ties very tightly into stuff that is still going on. But I think not in the way most people would think, because there's still people out there who think Roswell was a legitimate UFO case, a legitimate crashed saucer.
Or crashed extraterrestrial.
Right. Yeah. Before we get to that, though, Red Pill, you were talking about Jeremy Corbell and Knapp releasing something just now.
Well, the news of the town, and by town I mean the madhouse that is Twitter, has been exploding, discussing and commenting on, I think it is just one still image released by Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp on their podcast, Weaponized, because they have a YouTube channel. And they released what they call the Phantom of Baghdad. Supposedly, this is a still image from a United States video taken, I want to say May 2022. I don't remember the date exactly, but
I think that's what it was.
It is black and white, just like all the other military videos, and it shows, something that to me really looks a lot like just your regular like Patriot missile, crossing the screen from what seems to be a left to right trajectory. But according to Corbell, and who can verify that, his sources told him that this is classified as a bona fide UAP.
Yeah, and the photos got like, it was supposedly in Baghdad in Iraq that in May 22 of 22, like you said. But yeah, it's got like the same sorts of metadata, and I don't know whether or not this is authentic to, what an actual Air Force or military video would look like. It doesn't have to be Air Force, but it really does it's such an innocuous image. And it really does, in this particular one that I'm looking at now, it looks like a rocket. Not that doesn't mean a rocket can't be some sort of UFO, but the fact that there's such a hubbub is kind of weird about something that's this much of a nothing burger.
Yes, yeah. And I was looking at some comments people made on metabunk.org, and some people are like, oh, no, we don't have anything like that. And other people are like, it just looks like rocket exhaust. It's shot with a FLIR, and it looks like rocket exhaust.
Yeah, but Corbell is saying that the video is interesting because the object does not show the traditional signatures of what you'd see for reactionary propulsion. I guess all of his experience as a fashion designer and MMA fighter makes him an expert on reactionary propulsion.
Just what are you saying?
I'm saying nothing. I'm saying absolutely nothing.
I think that I think this is the way that modern missiles work. We think of rockets as your typical 1960s action movie. Someone fires something and you see the rocket always with a jet stream coming out from its rear end, right? Mm-hmm. Because rockets supposedly work. But nowadays I know that modern rockets have a way of gliding and have a way of, in order to move in a way that is closer to an aircraft in some parts of their trajectory. So I wonder if that is not the case here. What we're seeing here is just the modern equivalent of a Patriot missile, maybe final stage of its trajectory before it's going to strike a target.
Yeah. I mean, the fact that they are telling, again, I feel like this is something that is a very simple principle that people need to go back to again and again, which is, why do you believe these people? And why do you believe that the people that are providing this to them are telling them the truth?
Right.
And it's pretty perplexing. I think that taking things for granted is a dangerous road to go down if you're really serious about trying to get to the bottom of this stuff. And it's just these sort of the cavalier way in which people are like, oh yeah, I believe it. I totally believe it. It's trustworthy.
Well, I also showed you the guy that whatchamacallit there from Blink 182 posted, which looks like a CGI'd Star Destroyer going into hyperspace, and he's posting it saying it's a real video, and it's like, okay, come on.
Yeah, Tom DeLonge.
I mean, Tom DeLonge was the one on Joe Rogan who said everything on YouTube is real.
Yeah, and that video that you just showed us is the kind of video that I saw a lot of students, getting their hands on 3D Max or Maya.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, it's something that I've come across professionally multiple times. I could probably do it if you gave me a 3D, something that was already 3D rendered. It's not, they're also, if you look at it, there's a particular wobble to it that means that it's not they're not tracking it properly to the, to the actual video that's the base for it. And there's one part where you can see that it's transparent overlay when something goes by it that should have been in front of it. And it's also degraded so that there's, which is a really good way of making things, covering up bad CGI and bad, effects, is to make something look degraded. I do it all the time as like a aesthetic thing, for the purposes of making, films and stuff like that. So it makes sense. It's just also the design too. I again, maybe people are seeing, I absolutely believe that people are seeing things that look like sort of standard or traditional spaceships. Guillermo del Toro himself, he said that he was disappointed that his one UFO sighting, it looked like a prosaic, regular old flying saucer, and he was disappointed. Or so the story goes. But it looks like a spaceship from Battlestar Galactica going into FTL is what it does.
Exactly.
It's very much, it has that look,
Has the look, it has the sound, of the people reaction. Oh, what is that? Yeah. Oh, just disappeared. You can get one of your friends has zero acting skills to do that for you,
absolutely. And people are doing it to have fun. Plenty of my college students, I think, if they had the skills, would do stuff like this. It's for lulz. And unfortunately, Tom DeLonge is taking it at face value.
Yeah,
which means
bizarre.
other people will.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Okay. So Roswell. I mean, my take on Roswell is that nothing paranormal happened at Roswell. That this was probably, I mean, my take has been for a long time, and I think it started with John Keel saying that it was a Fuggo balloon, and it seemed to match a lot of this data. Like there's so much nonsense that's been injected into Roswell since 1980 that it's hard to kind of like clear away the chaff from the actual data, but the data is there. I mean, the original reports and what originally happened is there. And it doesn't match most of the speculative nonsense that's been added to it since. But the thing I always like to point out is that I don't think a lot of people realize that Roswell was pretty much completely forgotten until Moore and Berlitz's book in 1980.
Yep.
So,
and then day after Roswell in early 90s.
Right. But that, and the MJ-12 documents came out, which looked to be forgeries. There's never been any, evidence that those were real. It's just always been a non-thing to me. Now, when I had Douglas Dietrich on, he discussed Roswell in his sort of alternative history stuff. And Douglas claimed to be, well, he didn't claim to be. He was he worked at a military base in, I believe, San Francisco, and he was charged with destroying documents. He says he has an eidetic memory, so he read the documents before destroying them. And some of these documents talked about Roswell. And he said that Roswell was experiments with Japanese balloons piloted or with Japanese prisoners of war and stuff on board, and that's what the bodies were.
Yeah.
He also talks about the Battle of L.A. and says the Battle of L.A. was us shooting at Japanese balloons. And I didn't realize back then what a sophisticated program of balloon warfare that Japanese really had during World War II.
Yeah.
And they were working on delivering biological weapons.
Yeah, there was, what was it? It was Unit 731.
Yeah, 731 or 931, one of the two.
Yeah, it was, which was Japan's...
X-Files used that.
What was that?
Even the X-Files used that term in there.
Yeah.
Oh, did they?
Yeah. It's part of the mythology.
Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right, 731.
Right. Yeah, and they were making essentially like germ warfare weapons of mass destruction.
Yeah.
They got a lot of money from the Emperor. This is all during World War II. Yeah.
Now, Douglas's version of events is that we didn't actually beat the Japanese. The Japanese, we kind of surrendered to them with like, I don't even remember. It's been a long time, but it was because of the the germ warfare stuff they had an advantage on.
Yeah.
And he said the reason that they don't have a military as part of the agreement is we would protect them.
Huh.
And like you think about it, you look at his stuff and you can verify a lot of it. And it's kind of like, I don't know if the dots he's connecting are actually right, but there's something to this.
So what does he say then about us dropping bombs on them?
I don't remember. It's been a long time since I talked to him.
I'd be curious how that fits into the whole thing.
I mean, that was in the first couple of years of the show, so it's been a while.
Interesting. I don't remember that. Huh.
And I mean, it's two things with all these people claim to have read secret documents. Is one, whether they're telling the truth or not, whether they are remembering the facts accurately or not.
Right.
And two, whether the actual document were telling the truth or not. Where maybe there were some part of some psychological evaluation, or some lawyer test to see whether the person will spill the beans.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
So in reading Nick's book, I didn't realize that there was a program like Project Paperclip for the Japanese Unit 731 guys.
Yeah. Yep. There was. Yeah.
So they basically brought in these Japanese scientists who were experimenting on people the same way the Germans were and let them continue their work here.
Yeah. And like this is documented.
Yes.
I mean, this is documented during the 90s, I think, probably during either Clinton or Bush, the Committee on Human Radiation Experiments. Their research, it was like 1,600 scientists. Like that's
wow.
that was just Paperclip. Yeah.
Oh, that was just Paperclip.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
But they were experimenting on handicapped people.
Yep.
They were experimenting on people with deformities or anything like that. Basically people they didn't consider human, really, is what it came down to.
Similar to a lot of what the, was being done. The U.S. and they used prisoners a lot. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I feel like with a prisoner, you can at least get, hey, do this and you'll get some time off your sentence.
Yeah, it wasn't even that. It was there was a guy who was like, removing testicles of animals and putting them into live human prisoners.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, stuff like that. Yeah.
But yeah, and he has the documentation in the book here where after Roswell, they're asking permission to experiment on people.
Yeah.
You know, they're basically saying, what kind of people are we allowed to experiment on without their consent? Is this okay? You know, we want to use these type of people. We want to use prisoners. We want to, and they're trying to get it passed because I guess the trials of all the Nazis were coming along, and clearly this stuff was not being looked at nicely. As it shouldn't have been.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they were coming down hard on these Nazis, so they're like, well, if they realize we're doing the same experiments, they're not going to care why we're doing it, and we could be in a lot of trouble. So the explanation Nick has in the book, which comes from a number of people coming forth and talking to him at different time periods, is that Roswell is actually, he said, made up of probably two different events.
Right.
One where a balloon carrying a module was struck by lightning, and that's what crashed on Brazel's ranch. And part of it crashed on his ranch, part of it crashed separately, and it killed the pilot. And apparently he had the body of the pilot. And this is something that doesn't come out in much stuff, but he has documentation showing that he said, hey, I got this weird thing, because the pilot was small, and he was beaten to hell. Like, he got just destroyed when he hit the ground. So he didn't, it wasn't obviously a person. And so he hid it away in his like garage or barn or something for a while before telling the authorities. But there were also experiments done with some of these people the Japanese were experimenting on. They brought here these same people that they had in these experiments. They brought here and continued experimenting on them, exposing them to radiation and doing high altitude tests on them. Like what are the effects of putting someone at a high altitude? And that crash happened a few months before Roswell.
Yeah.
And that was what the bodies came from. And some of the people in that crash had progeria, which creates things like a larger skull, an older look. Like someone with progeria generally doesn't live, I think he said, past like 15, but they can look like they're 50.
Yeah.
They can sometimes have extra fingers and toes.
And it has the morphology of the head of progeria. It really is very similar to the like the alien gray head shape.
Right.
Usually there's like a longer nose, but I don't know if that's the case all the time.
Right. Yeah, it also affects the nose and the appearance of the mouth and the eyes and stuff. So his suspicion is that this is what happened. You had these two crashes, you had a bunch of different stories. People collected them together. It didn't sound like anything earthly to them, but they were really these human experiments that were going on that shouldn't have been. One woman worked at a hospital and saw some of these bodies come in, and that's how she got to know about some of the data. One of the other guys he talked to worked for, I think, the MOD over in the UK.
One of them was the woman. Her name was like Maria or something.
Well, he calls her the Black Widow.
Right. But I feel like there was at one point the name came out and it was, it's the woman. She's part of I'm completely blanking, so I'm not going to say it. But yeah, the woman referred to as a Black Widow. Her name is Maria, and there's some connection to somebody from, Roswell lore. But yeah, others were Al Barker was one of them, and Bill Salter, who were both intelligence, espionage, and these are people he's been talking to since I think the beginning of the aughts.
Okay, yeah, the MOD guy, I think I want to say he talked to him in the late 90s.
Okay, yeah.
And what he said is that that's what they thought happened, but the American connection they had was telling them that they were aliens. And he was going, this is not aliens, and that's what he was telling Nick. And he met with him only once, and then he disappeared. But Nick was able to figure out who he was and verified that he did work for the group that he said he worked for.
Yeah.
But I mean, this leaves us in a situation where you're looking at Roswell, and this is a horrible, dark chapter in American history that seems to just keep repeating. For one, how many times has the American government experimented on its own people?
Yep.
And I don't think a lot of people know that. So you can't say the government's not capable of X, because they've done some pretty horrible things, and it's different people. It's not like the same people keep doing this stuff. Yeah.
And it's not usually a government wide thing too. And you know, I'm looking at you pandemic people. It's not that. It's usually small, not rogue, but like, isolated outfits. And maybe there are thousands or, even millions of people that are affected, but it's usually these sort of it's controlled experiments. It's the same thing we do to animals. it's humans. It wasn't just the Nazis that were doing this. It's, there are some people that do, I think, either are sociopaths or they feel that there is, I guess the loss, it's outweighed by the people that would be saved, or they're sadists. I mean,
right,
a lot of times people who have, want to inflict pain end up in those circumstances.
So one chapter here says, nevertheless, the documents that were recovered, which was not all of them, led to the identification of nearly 4,000 human radiation experiments sponsored by the federal government between 1944 and 1974.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's only what they recovered. It's like MK Ultra. I mean, that stuff came out, but they destroyed a whole host of those documents.
Yeah. You know what this does make me think of, and when I was thinking about this, when you were sort of proposing it for us to talk about, is I am thinking of that in terms of today, and what would be that, like, so radiation was the thing that people are freaking out about, and they're testing in whatever way they possibly can, no matter the whatever the outcome of it. And part of me thinks that, I don't know, that if you were to try to find what that thing is now, that there are weird, experiments being done, I feel like it's something more along the lines of AI and Neuralink. Like people are getting like, like weird stuff put in there, like implants in their head or something like that.
I think there's plenty of people that just flat out volunteer for that, honestly.
Yeah. I'm sure people would step right up. That's part of the new strategy,
So the other thing is that they were trying to hide not just the human experimentation, but they were trying to hide what they were working on from the Soviets. So when the crash saucer thing kicked in, more and more they started saying, yeah, that's what it was. It was a spaceship. Because it sounds ridiculous to most people. And they're not, let's see, so it says, where was I here? I lost my place. Influencing the opinions of people, whether Soviet or otherwise, who were snooping into stories of strange bodies and unusual aircraft found in New Mexico, in the New Mexico desert in 1947, would have been of paramount importance to those tasked with hiding the truth. And it was indeed during this particular time frame that a host of crashed UFO accounts began to surface, a number of which show clear signs of official creation and dissemination. Both Bill Salter and Al Barker have stated unequivocally that in the early 1950s, the government's Psychological Strategy Board and the Army's Psychological Warfare Branch spread spurious UFO tales, including crashed UFO accounts, to the Soviets in an attempt to mask the true nature of the events in New Mexico.
Yeah.
If someone digs deep enough, one does indeed find it. A 1952 document then from the CIA Director Walter B. Smith to the Director of Psychological Strategy Board entitled Flying Saucer states, I am today transmitting to the National Security Council a proposal in which it is concluded that the problems connected with the unidentified flying objects appear to have implications for psychological warfare as well as intelligence and operations. I suggest that we discuss at an early board meeting the possible offensive or defensive utilization of these phenomena for psychological warfare purposes.
Yeah. Yep.
So, I mean, that's recorded documentation of this. This isn't someone just making this claim.
I mean, playing David devil's advocate here, there's another investigative journalist, Annie Jacobson, I think is her name. Mm-hmm. She wrote massive about Area 51, and she had her sources, claiming that the truth about Roswell was that it was some kind of like a psyop experiment, but from the Soviets. Like they sent out another balloon with deformed children that were operated by Josef Mengele, and this was Stalin's plan to somehow, see or destabilize.
That's right.
States. So, I mean, now who you believe, like, is it, do you go and compare like credentials, see if Jacobson's credentials are better than Nick's credentials. I don't know. I'm pretty agnostic with regards to Roswell. It's because maybe I don't really care that much. Like the water in that well is so polluted that we're never gonna find the truth. But at the same time, I don't think that any theory explains it all. Even Nick's
what do
theory
What do you feel like Nix doesn't explain?
The Jesse Marcel's claims about the particular, behavior of the materials he gathered, that he showed his son.
He does actually explain that in here. Apparently, there is a number of materials that we did have then that will behave exactly like what Jesse Marcel said.
Like nitinol and all that?
I don't remember it. I don't have the page marked. He's
something that they were investigating and working on since the 1940s. But the other stuff, like the idea that they were having something like balsa wood that you couldn't even set on fire, and that was unbreakable. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of weird things that are part of some of these different balloons, like rubberized silk and stuff like that. So, I have no idea. I mean, I absolutely, would assume the people that Marcel and those who saw it were smart, but I don't know if I came across some sort of material that I hadn't seen before, like I wouldn't know how to describe what rubberized silk feels like. So, who knows?
I mean, because they talked about.
But you're right. It doesn't. I don't know. It doesn't necessarily explain that. The weirdness of that. But if these were strange materials, experimental balloon materials,
I mean, one of the things John Keel said is if this was an actual Fugo balloon, those were made by girls in high school. The Japanese government had girls in high school making the materials for these balloons.
Yeah.
So
I don't know the rubberized silk thing is, I think, one of the materials that Fugo balloons, but it very well could be a different type at some point. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, what I'm saying though is that they did this, and apparently the girls would draw designs and stuff on it. Or write things in Japanese, which someone in 1947 finding a beam that has Japanese writing on it, it's going to look like hieroglyphics.
Not to someone like Jesse Marcel, though.
Really?
I mean, he was someone in the military, and he just fought in, I don't know if he fought in World War II, but I mean, don't you think that someone in that capacity will be able to recognize, oh yeah, that's Japanese writing?
Maybe, yeah. But that brings you back to, it could have just been something we were working on. And there is a crash recorded of a balloon in that time frame.
Sure.
So, I mean, I don't see anything that actually points at an extraterrestrial origin for this.
Oh, yeah, me neither.
Yeah.
Me neither. And even if there was something, like truly anomalous about Roswell, people are so obsessed with the idea that this is the one case that is going to break the whole dam wide open. Like I saw for 20 years, I saw American ufologists put all their eggs in that particular handbasket.
Yeah.
Then maybe that is the reason why I steer clear of Roswell, because every time something new alluding to Roswell surfaced, everybody lost their marbles, and the clearest example of this is the Roswell slide circus.
Oh, yeah.
In 2015, someone found some weird Kodachrome slides in some box, and they saw, weird things, and they immediately assume, oh my God, these are aliens, and it's connected to Roswell.
Mm-hmm.
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
And it blew totally out of proportion, and it had a prosaic explanation. It was some photograph of some archaeological exhibition. So it was, someone taking an interesting picture of a child's mummy.
Yeah.
But in the minds of the true believers, the child mummy turn into an alien. So that's why I kind of like steer clear of Roswell, and I find Nick's theory interesting, plausible. It's not provable either. I mean.
Well, no, because most of the documentation has been destroyed, like the MK Ultra stuff.
That's the thing, So I don't know how you will be able to find further evidence of it.
I mean, basically, these people got away with what they did, if this is what happened. And we know this stuff happened, period. I mean, there's documentation that wasn't destroyed that basically phrases this as, he points at a number of documents in the book where they talk about our testing, we need more data. The testing we have done is only fragmentary on people.
Right.
And so it's like they're basically admitting they've already done human experiments, but they want permission to continue.
Right.
Yeah.
One of the quotes here that I found really interesting, they're talking about the MJ-12 documents and how the FBI, it says, whether or not the FBI was ever fully satisfied by its investigations into MJ-12, it says one thing is certain. All we're finding out is that the government doesn't know what it knows, an FBI source told Howard Bloom. There are too many secret levels. And I thought that was extremely telling because like you were saying, Chris, it's not one massive entity. It's a bunch of little things. And one hand doesn't always know what the other hand, in fact, in most cases, doesn't know what the other hand is doing.
Yeah.
So when they questioned this guy about the documents, he said that he told them he could tell them what happened at Roswell, and they said, that's not what we're asking you. Like, they wanted nothing to do with that. They just wanted him to tell them about the document, where the documents came from.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that means either they were just staying on point or this was, like that just wasn't of interest to them. So yeah, the thing is though, here over and over, you see these comments about how they're using this to cover these test flights.
Mm-hmm.
And what are we seeing today? The same thing.
Sure.
And it's likely our technology. And people are like, no, it can't be. It can't be. We'd know about it. And it's like, why do you think we would know? Like, why do you think any, like, normal, even, like, military people would know about top secret projects? And again, when you're looking at, even the government doesn't know what it knows.
Yeah.
You're just accepting that, oh, yeah, we would know what this is. And none of it seems to be that far off from technology that we do know about.
One thing that go ahead.
Playing devil's advocate again, and this is kind of like the same argument of the lunar landing hoax. One of the first arguments that come to mind is, well, the Soviets would have been the first ones to blow the whistle on the hoax in order to discredit Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And thing will go with this kind of experiments. I mean, if the Soviet spies were smart enough to infiltrate in the most important secret project in American history, which was the Manhattan Project. It goes to argue that they would have been privy, or that they would have known about these illegal experiments as well. Mm-hmm. So why didn't they accuse the United States before the United Nations of conducting this horrible experiment? I mean,
I bet because they're doing the same thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it's one of those like why during war, maybe I can't find a good example because, we're throwing all sorts of things at each other, but it's like one of those, I guess, not the unspoken agreements, but
Chinese would have done that. Okay, not the Soviets because they were doing the same. The Chinese would have, and the Chinese would have been the first interested in knowing about the atrocities of the Japanese and the Americans because the Chinese people were the subjects of these experiments during the war. So why hasn't communist China say, hey, these Americans, these imperialists did the same thing that the Japanese did during the war?
Yeah.
I think today it would be dismissed as propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, it was dealt with to some degree, like during the Committee on Radioactive Experimentation. But yeah, it's a good question. I mean,
well, it assumes they knew. That's the other thing,
right?
Yeah, and I will be the first to agree that during the war, secrets were more easily kept because people had that mindset, like loose lips sinks ships. There was this idea that people were fighting for their lives. But, like something like that probably won't be able to be, kept that way, and I'm thinking right now of the Havana syndrome, well, maybe years will know, I would say, well, it did leak out eventually.
Yeah, but we still don't know.
Right. Well, then there's that Wall Street Journal article that came out that talks about how they're like, oh yeah, COVID was from the Wuhan lab.
Yeah.
Everybody else is like, well, we don't know, but no.
Well. So there was I think it was the health department in the UK got someone did a FOIA on them, and they got, I think this is where this whole thing started. So when COVID started, they said, we need you to find out where this came from.
Mm-hmm.
And the doctors looking at it said, well, I mean, it looks like it came out of a lab. Yeah. This is where our bets are. This came out of a lab, like 70% chance it came out of a lab, 30% chance it's natural. And then they were told, and the wording of this is very similar to something from 9/11, They were told to explain how this came about naturally.
Yeah.
So it was like, here's your end game. Get us there. And that's what they did with the Building 7 committee for 9/11. They said they didn't charge this committee of engineers in figuring out how Building 7 came down. They said, Building 7 came down from office fires. Explain to us how that happened.
Yeah.
So that's once they explained it, it's like, see, engineers say it came down from building fires. And it's like, no, you told them that's how it came down, and they had to do the math to make it equal that.
Yeah. I mean, it's tightly controlled. There are people that believe that's the way things should be done, and usually they're the people that end up in power.
Yes. Yeah.
The magic bullet in JFK's assassination. You have to come up with some kind of like fancy physics in order to explain how a bullet is able to change trajectory and enter one body, into the other in a completely different, direction. And it also remain in pristine condition after, severing, puncturing through muscle and bone, and skin, whatnot, of two human male adult bodies.
And there's been no reckoning over that either. I mean, what was that?
No. Maybe, and this is now me putting my conspiracy theory. Maybe the people in power will say this is a tragedy, but this is no reason to start World War III over.
But would it be World War III? I think it would be more that we'd find out that we did it.
I mean, it would have been World War III. I guess the rationale was, the Cubans were involved in the assassination of JFK with the mafia, and if we go and try that, then the Soviets are going to respond, and this is going to escalate beyond anyone's control, and somebody is going to do something stupid, and there goes.
Yeah. I guess I could see that.
Again,
So the thing with any of this stuff, though, it's like, it's not, you have to have someone in a position of power who actually wants to get to what really happened. And they're not going to get a lot of support for that.
Yeah.
Russ Baker.
I don't think people like that get into positions of power.
Right.
Like you get up in a position of power, I think, because you don't care about the truth.
And
you care about your own. Yeah.
You don't rock the boat.
Position of power. Yeah. And your job is to get this thing, society, the government, the country, not to fall apart on your watch.
Yep.
And rattling the cage is not conducive to, maintain things in order.
Yeah.
So Nick sent his book to the Air Force Office of Public Affairs and, said, this is what I've uncovered. I'm going to publish this. And he said they called him and said, Mr. Redfern, the Air Force considers any theory on the Roswell incident that is not supported by our two reports of 1995 and 1997 to be incorrect. And that is the Air Force's official position and our only comment, except to say that we recommend that people read our reports for the facts. Good luck with your book.
Yeah, exactly.
So, they're not going to, they've said their final word. And honestly, and I said this back when this stuff came out, is they were like, well, we really can't find any documentation on it. And here you have Nick saying, well, yeah, they destroyed all the documentation because it wasn't supposed to be happening.
And also the documentation is not within the Air Force, it is within the Department of Energy.
Yes.
Where everybody's saying that people should look for, the smoking gun,
So, that is an important part of that, is that it's not, the Air Force wouldn't have the records because it wasn't them.
Yep.
It wasn't them, yeah.
Now, the thing in this book that kind of blew me away, though, is he brings up the alien autopsy film. And apparently there were two films. His contact in, I think it was the MOD, whoever the guy in the UK was that he only talked to once, was shown one of these films that was very, very graphic. And he said it was horrible to watch, so on and so forth. But he's like, I'm pretty sure that was a human being they were dissecting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the film came out, the alien autopsy thing, which I just thought was ridiculous. I didn't think it looked real. But here he says, the controversy continues to this day over the nature of the film and whether it represents a real event, an outrageous hoax, or a piece of government-sponsored disinformation. But comments on the film made by dermatologist Thomas Johnson of the Ludwig Maximilians University, Germany, at the time of its public airing support the whistleblower testimony revealed in this book. Speaking with Der Spiegel magazine in April 1996, Jansen stated that in his opinion, the film showed a female about 13 years old. She had unmistakable progeria, and everything fits.
Yeah.
So people sick with progeria age at remarkable swiftness. Even as children, they look old. They suffer dwarfism, hair and teeth that fall out, and clogged arteries. Most of them die before puberty from heart attacks or strokes. Also, it's not unusual that the dead girl has 6 toes and 6 fingers. Polydactylism, said the dermatologist, is often seen accompanying rare deformities. Johnson considers his circumstantial evidence to be 100% watertight. Professors around the Ludwig Maximilians University agree with this judgment, the findings being published in the Munich Weekly Medical Journal.
I mean, what can I say? I mean, I remember there were people in the United States, also in other countries. I read back in those days the Spanish magazine Año Cero, and there were all these guys, these UFO journalists, talking to physicians, talking to medical doctors, and trying to get their medical, professional opinion on the alien autopsy video, and trying to say, do you think that's real? Do you think that's a real flesh and blood body, regardless of nature and origin? I remember some people saying, "Oh yes, that's really seems to be an actual, those seems to be real organs." And some other people say, "No, that's ridiculous. No professional pathologist will operate the scalpel like that. That's not the way you perform an autopsy." So it was all back and forth.
I remember that.
I mean, I'm still 100% convinced that Ray Santilli faked the video. Now, if you want to believe Santilli's story, that yes, he faked the video, but the video was trying to copy.
Right, to recreate something.
Yeah, they was trying to recreate an original film that he acquired, but that film had been degraded beyond all recognition. So he had to try to, recreate it based on what he remembered seeing.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe Santilli saw the autopsy of a girl with progeria, and tried to tell his buddies, with the special effects, hey, try to make the alien look like that.
Certainly a possibility. Says here, there is also the little-known fact that Philip Mantle had the opportunity on April 28, 1995, to view a piece of film footage at Ray Santillini's London office that was strikingly similar in nature to the widely publicized film, but that related to the autopsy of another unusual body. The alien is humanoid, stated Mantle, almost human-looking with an enlarged abdomen, 2 arms, 2 legs, but it has 6 digits in each of its hands and feet. There's no hair visible anywhere. The head is slightly enlarged, but it has a nose, mouth, ears, and 2 dark eyes. Female genitals are also visible. The alien's body is cut open and various organs are removed and placed in various receptacles. The people conducting the autopsy are completely covered in protection suits of some kind, and unfortunately the faces of these individuals are not visible. Ray Santillini would later state the second piece of footage was not released due to the graphic dissection of the creature's genitalia. What was the other thing here that they said, though? The eyes, because it has the big black eyes.
Right.
And they removed the lenses, and he was told that was what those lenses were, what they were using to test. They were trying to create protection for pilots who were dropping nuclear bombs. So it would avoid the flash blindness. And
so these were like contact lenses?
Sort of. They were very large contact lenses and very thick, and apparently were incredibly uncomfortable to wear. And they never worked, basically.
Yeah, I mean, what will make people think that they need to try to test that instead of like using regular goggles?
That's a good question.
Yeah, that's the first thing I'm thinking too. Yeah.
So when he gets to the film, the guy who did the film, this is actually a believable explanation. So he says he was called to come down and film this crash site. He said, "I filmed the crash site and also the poor." I'm just going to read what he says. Also, the poor freaks, and we were told to keep back. I filmed the vehicle itself and the area around it. I felt nervous of something I could not understand or explain. There were injured creatures lying around, obviously in pain, but the men at the site were too scared to get close. There was a great deal of confusion until we arrived. My authority allowed me to operate as an independent as long as I didn't interfere with the cleanup. When I arrived, I set up my tent and equipment, and once I had light, I started shooting. How did I feel about it? I was concerned about potential contamination, but I had no choice. Most of the processing took place around August. By the time the military as we knew it ceased to be, The Air Force and the Army were about to split, and my unit was about to be disbanded for a time anyway. In fact, you could say I was in a strange position for a time, not belonging to either one service. They eventually found a home for us. I took all the film because I had no one to report to. My orders were not to discuss the situation with anyone unless they brought up the subject first. The first batch had been delivered, then the department folded, and I had no one to deliver to. I tried to contact McMullen, but couldn't get through, and in the end, I couldn't leave it laying around, so I took it home with me, which is where it stayed. By the cameraman's own admission, the event he filmed did not relate to the July 1947 event at Roswell, but to an earlier May 1947 crash in the vicinity of White Sands. Which tallies with what he says, what Bill Salter said, who asserted that several vehicles had been involved in a high-altitude radiation and biological experiments at White Sands in the period from May to August 1947. Similarly, the Black Widow was certain that the strange bodies she had seen at Oak Ridge were very badly damaged from one of several White Sands crashes. I was told there were several classified balloon flights in May and July 1947, and at least 2 were disasters. So when you look at it from a very practical standpoint, would our government do this? Yes. Does it explain almost everything about Roswell? It kind of does. And you have the admission of the military people saying that they're going to use UFOs as disinfo, which, Jacques Vallée also gets into in Messengers of Deception, how they got into UFO groups and things like that. And in a sense, when the Air Force came out and said this was a mogul balloon, it wasn't completely wrong. It was probably a balloon of some sorts.
Yeah.
A little bit of truth and just not all of it.
I mean, that oftentimes seems to be the way that the world works when it's humans doing stuff. So I can believe that. I certainly can. And I think particularly if there was other weird stuff. I mean, if you look at now that it's making me think about sort of the details of the Trinity site event that, as Vallée talked about and Harris talked about in their most recent book. That again was, these sort of small, strange looking, childlike creatures in what looked like sort of work gray overalls. But that was 45, and you're talking about right after Trinity. So if there was a lot of these extraneous radioactive tests happening in that area over those, 5 years.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. First of all, if we're giving credence to the Trinity story, and I'm still undecided, I'm still agnostic.
Right. That's a good point to make. Yes.
One, the 2 witnesses, Ramé Vaca, Jose Padilla, they described the entities as insect-like.
Oh, okay.
Number 2, the object that crashed seemed to be quite heavy. They had to create a
That's
whole
right.
road.
It was several tons. Yes, that's right.
They weighed several tons, and the U.S. I guess it wasn't the Air Force yet. It was before the Air Force. They had to ask Baca's father permission to go through his property and create a new road for the truck to go in, and even the guy said, well, why do you need to do that if it's just a balloon?
Yeah.
Why can't you just put it in some Jeep or something and just get going? So I don't know, I would be hesitant to link the Trinity stuff to the body snatchers in the desert stuff. Doesn't seem to coincide.
And the body snatcher part also comes into play because there's documentation of them trying to find a legal way to get children's bodies, like dead that have passed away, to experiment on.
Yeah. I mean, that's more what I meant. I wasn't saying necessarily a balloon, but if you're thinking of, and again, this is if there's any validity to that story at all, but I mean, you can't imagine that they were probably trying many different ways to protect human beings from radiation. So, at some point, maybe they were trying out some lead-lined shell, craft or something like that. That's why it was so heavy.
And that's almost certainly the case. It's because they wanted to have atomic aircraft. This was a big deal in the military at that time, is to get a nuclear reactor on a plane.
Right.
And they did test fly a bunch of them.
And I'm just thinking again about like Go Rightly's most recent book, as you know, I all know you are all very well aware of Saucer Spooks and Kooks, and how, you know, essentially what was, again, sort of, you know, or at least what Go Rightly is putting forth is that similar shenanigans were sort of going on around the mute stuff, or at least, you know, this is the, you know, trying to not cover up, but like this is checking in on spills, or, you know, this is the you know, all these various things that could be, and that was like 70s, you know, you're talking about when it started. So again, these could be completely disparate, but there is a certain like, you know, there are certain patterns that seem to, or connections that seem to be there. But again, it could be, you know, human pattern making at that point, you know, on my part at least too. I'm just sending you guys just a link so you can see. These are a couple of shots of people with progeria, just to give you an idea of what that can, you know, look like.
Right.
Yeah.
And people should Google that if they're not familiar with it, because it very much looks like what we now associate grays with. It has that sort of alien look to it.
Mm-hmm.
And how much of that came from these type of things, you know?
Right.
Using this stuff as cover.
Yeah, but then again, you know, like where did that sort of really intense, iconic Whitley Strieber, you know, image come from?
Yeah. I still go back to that being connected to shamanism.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I do think, you know, I think that a lot of what Whitley is experiencing, such as shamanism, and connected to the work that he was doing, which is essentially, you know, a different version of tantric work with the Gurdjieff sensing exercises.
One of the things that one of his informants tells him in this book is that there have never been UFO crashes in United States history. Like, just flat out says, look, there's never been a UFO crash. There's never been aliens. It's all cover stories for secret projects. And the thing is, you can tell people that, and, you know, I mean, they could be lying, of course, but it makes sense, and we can see that, like, as time moves on. Remember back in, I don't know, a couple of years ago, the New York Times? I don't know, some newspaper put out an article where the Air Force admitted that certain high-altitude UFO sightings that pilots were having were one of their secret test craft. And the media ran with it and was like, UFOs are now explained. I'm like, explains like a handful of sightings by pilots in this particular time frame. But I mean, still, it would, you know, when they happened, they weren't about to tell people what they were. And as far as these pilots were concerned, these things were up much higher than anyone could get to. So it's just, you know, all of it just becomes a mess. Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back. Quick break here in the show so I can give you some information and a recommendation. So information first. If you want to contact the show, wheredidtheroadgo.com has links to everything, all the social media and such, YouTube, merchandise, all shows back to the beginning. You can email contact@wheredidtheroadgo.com if you have a story you would like to share. The best place to send that is stories@wheredidtheroadgo.com. If you want to physically mail me something, it's P.O. Box 444, Ovid, New York, 14521. There's a Discord, there's a Facebook page, there's a Facebook group, there's a Twitter, there's all kinds of stuff. And of course, if you want to become a patron, that's there too. It's only $3 a month, and it seriously helps support the show. And you get extra stuff almost every week, and the show a week early. All right. As for recommendations, I'm going to go with an older podcast here that I really enjoyed. Like, it wasn't the best quality in some respects, but they haven't done anything since 2021. It's a podcast called The Bridge, and it was an interesting concept of a bridge that was built across the Atlantic Ocean that only lasts a little bit before people kind of abandon it. But there's weird paranormal stuff associated with the bridge. And it's the way the stories are told can be really, really poetic and beautiful at times, especially with some of the background music. So I thoroughly enjoyed this thing, The Bridge, and it's just The Bridge podcast. I don't think they're going to do anything else, unfortunately, but it was one of the early fiction podcasts I found and really, really loved. Like I said, some of the editing and stuff is so-so, but overall it is well worth the listen. So, okay. With that, that's my recommendation for this week, the Bridge Podcast. And now back to our show. I am here with Christopher Ernst and Red Pill Junkie, and we're talking about Roswell, of all things, among other things. So I wanted to say about the Fugo balloons that I think kind of is important in all this. So when the first Fugo balloon came down in the U.S. and we started to realize what was going on, apparently there's, I forget the name of the group, like the American censorship thing or something like that, contacted all the different news organizations and said, look, these are Japanese weapons. We don't want them to be able to track them, so please don't report on them.
Right.
And everyone stopped reporting on them. So you never heard another word about them, which is why no one knew about the Fugo balloons till far after World War II. They did kill like 5 people.
Yeah.
They were hiking through I don't know, the balloon came down in the woods somewhere, and it was this group of people found it, and one guy was trying to get help with it, and one of the other guys went over and I guess touched it, and it blew up and killed like all of them but the guy who was going to get help. There is some suspicion that some of the forest fires at the time may have been set off by these balloons. And if I remember right, John Keel said one blew up over like Brazil in 1952 because they were still up in the upper atmosphere just floating around.
So, yeah. So is that balloon fever? I wonder if it's a thing that happens.
But then but the thing is they were able to keep it quiet just by asking.
Yeah.
You couldn't do that today.
Oh no.
Please, people, don't talk about this. We can talk about this if we want.
Yeah.
One thing that I found interesting that's somewhat related to this, at least it's in the sort of the ongoing disinformation that's associated with it, is that it seems like in Lou Elizondo's more recent posts and statements out to the world, he seems to be leaning back in on that thing that Bob Lazar said in his Joe Rogan interview, or hinted at, which is the idea that at least one of the crafts was found at an archaeological site. One of the crafts that he supposedly saw at S4.
Oh, right.
And this is
not
even taking into account, the whole Bob Lazar thing, but
I
interesting he's returning to that. Yeah.
I hate it when Joe Rogan always brings up Bob Lazar and says he's never backed down or deviate from his original story from 1980 or something, For 30 years, he's been telling the same story. Like, that's not true.
No, it's not true.
The thinking of him saying that maybe it was dig up from some archaeological site, that's something that he started saying back when Jeremy Corbell brought back from hibernation.
And now Lou is taking the same act. Yep.
Yeah, of course. The same way that Bob Lazar no longer talks about him having some majestic clearance.
Right.
For S4. Why? Because nobody takes Majestic 12 seriously anymore.
Right.
So there was an interesting thing about Majestic in here. Let's see if I can find it. Basically, this balloon type thing came down somewhere, and I do not see it mentioned.
Oh, and by the way, apparently there's been some new information uncovered about Lazar concerning his first wife and some murder she was involved in with the Hells Angels, something like that.
What?
I know, it's crazy, right? I mean, people have been speculating about Lazar having literal skeletons on his closet, and in that a guy, Douglas Dean Johnson, I think his name, he's a researcher that he's very knowledgeable with regards to laws. A lawyer, so he's following all the developments with the bills and the way that the defense bills incorporate the new legislation that involves UAPs and all that. But he's also has been looking into Bob Lazar's stories, the inconsistencies, and apparently there's this new information about Lazar that I haven't really looked into yet. But yeah, that seems to be related to his first wife and some kind of like crime.
All right.
Boy.
So stay tuned.
Yeah, I can't wait. I mean, I'm terrible in that, even though I, think it's, a bunch of hooey, I probably watch anything Bob Lazar comes on just because it's these morbid curiosity.
Yeah, it's a train wreck, but it's fun to watch.
So in the book here, he says that he's talking to Al Barker, and he says he claims to know the origin of the term Majestic 12, as it appears in the controversial documents made available by Moore and Charles in the 1980s. He says it was in reality an inside joke with the Intel boys that was inspired by a newspaper account from 1947 that hit the headlines, and that interestingly referenced crashed UFOs, Japanese saucers, and even incorporated the word majestic into the account. And he gave him a newspaper article from July 14th, 1947 from Yonkers, New York. And it said, Eastchester came up with its own version of a flying disc on Saturday night, but whether the gadget flew into town under its own power or was placed there by a practical prankster was still being investigated today by Eastchester police. On his constitutional, well, there's a word that just doesn't get used anymore. On his evening constitutional on Saturday, Lawrence Castellucci of 69 Homestead Avenue noticed a shiny metal object stuck in the hedge bordering its front lawn. This what's-it has since been described as various people as a cookie can cover, a pie plate, or a cracker tin cover, equipped with tube. Flying or otherwise, the disc carries on its surface a clutter of mechanical contrivances, including a radio tube, a transformer, a condenser, and another gadget which police describe as a radio speaker unit. If that adds up to a flying machine, each Eastchester may have a flying disc. The disc is about 10 inches in diameter and is surrounded by a rim of about 1 inch high. The condenser and transformer have Japanese markings on them and are unquestionably of Japanese origin. The radio tube is a Majestic G38. The joker on the contraption is a white label with red trimming on the top of the disc. It bears the admonition in English, Finder, please return to Chokyo Rose, Japan. So,
see, what I read somewhere, I don't remember right now where, is that the term MJ12 actually is real. I mean, you can find them in government documents, but it has nothing to do with, UFOs or crash retrieval programs. I think the term Majority 12 or something, but it was some kind of like plan that the United States have put together in order to maintain continuity of government in case of a nuclear conflict.
Right.
With the Soviet Union.
Yeah.
So that's what I've read, and
I have that too. Yeah.
So, and this is the reason why I say, well, yeah, somebody took this real government term and just embedded it into a fake UFO-related government document.
Yeah.
A government forgery.
And that's, again, it's a little bit of mixing the truth with nonsense.
Well, that's the way to do it. I mean, that's the best way to do it. Yeah.
That's the recipe for disinformation. You need to pepper it with a little bit of truth. Otherwise, people will not buy it.
And there was something, I don't remember where I read it. Was it maybe in Golightly's book, where it said the Russians had planted a story in an Indian newspaper and then brought it up like 10 years later? Because
yes, I read.
Yeah, because then it wasn't connected to them. Yeah, it was about AIDS. Yeah.
Yes.
Wasn't that something like experimenting on creating AIDS, or the American government creating AIDS or something like that?
I think it was something like that. Yeah.
Something like that. Yes.
So they planted the story and then just let it sit for like 10 years. And then people started finding it and they were like, hey, what the hell is this? Without realizing that it was disinfo from the beginning.
Yeah, this conspiracy that the HIV virus had been created to get rid of the quote-unquote undesirables of society.
Right.
Minorities. Pick your favorite one.
Yep. And when you look at like this, and then you look at the other big cases, like, I mean, obviously he talks about Aztec in here, which doesn't seem to have ever had anything really significant to it.
Right.
And you look at Rendlesham, which at one point I would have said Rendlesham was a great case, and now it's so muddied, and it looks like, again, it was probably some level of psyop.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I used to be so into Rendlesham.
And the area itself is interesting.
Yeah.
What was that?
And I used to be into Roswell too.
Yeah.
I mean, Roswell is like the ufological equivalent of Barney the dinosaur.
Yeah.
And now you're just preaching, and you're ashamed to admit that you were into it.
Well, I mean, when you're first getting into this stuff, the idea that a UFO may have crashed and, they had, look how many TV shows spawned off the idea, movies spawned off the idea of a crashed saucer. I mean, obviously there was the show Roswell, which I never watched, but there was stuff like less obvious, like 7 Days.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
That stuff has just infiltrated our culture to such an extreme, and to think it really didn't pop into our culture until the 80s. But sci-fi immediately grabbed it and ran with the what if, idea. I'm sure there's other ones, but they're not coming to mind right now.
Oh, all the Roswell stuff that happened?
That's been incorporated into movies and TV shows.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's like there was the Roswell TV show. There have been several Roswell TV shows that have happened since the 90s. Yeah, there was like one TV series in like the early 2000s. And then there was a new one. I'm sorry, it was not in like the late 90s. And there was another one, I think, that just got rebooted. I don't know. I'm not even keeping up with it. I think a lot of that came out of the Corso book, though, right?
I don't know. I never watched
I feel like that was the day after Roswell, because that had a pretty big like release, I think.
I think it did, yeah.
And that was kind of the thing that brought it back into the real sort of like pop culture zeitgeist.
I mean, I get that got Roswell into overdrive, but the first book, the one by Charles Berlitz and Bill Moore,
yes,
that is the thing that got Roswell into, the map.
Yeah,
and there was a movie, I mean, Robbie Graham, kept record of all the movies that had to do with UFOs. And one of the first movies that talked about Roswell, I think happened in the 1980s. I want to say 83 or 85.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a made-for-TV movie that shows some space shuttle crashing with a flying saucer, and the flying saucer crashes into the desert, and they try to retrieve it. And it has all the earmarks of Roswell, even the idea that the scientists discovered the records of the aliens and show that the aliens have been coming to Earth for thousands of years. And at one point they even mated with, primitive human beings in order to, create the modern human race, which is obviously all the ancient alien stuff.
Right.
Yeah. You know what it was? I think, didn't they have Jesse Marcel on In Search Of?
I think so, yeah.
I think they did, yeah. I think that might have been where I first saw it.
She definitely was on Unsolved Mysteries, the Unsolved Mysteries.
I remember the Unsolved Mysteries, in the late 80s they did that, yeah.
And even Stanton Friedman was involved with that.
Yeah.
Well, Stanton Friedman was right in the middle of all the Roswell stuff. Interestingly, he was also one of the people working on the nuclear airplanes as well.
Yeah, nuclear airplanes, and this is something that he didn't talk about too much until the end of his life, into a secret program to investigate UFOs and try to replicate them.
Really?
Yeah.
I never heard about that.
This is something that Vallée wrote about in Forbidden Science, McDonnell Douglas. And I think that Stan was working for them for a while. They were having this really hush-hush private program to study UFOs. This is interesting because they actually even investigated the Aurora story, the one about the something crashing in Texas in the
1897.
And according to Vallée, they did recover, traces of, very pure concentrations of aluminum or something.
Mm-hmm. The metamaterials.
Yeah.
The thing is, like, when you eliminate all this stuff from the data set of UFO, it again starts looking more and more, less and less physical, more and more something in between. Because the only physical evidence we supposedly have are these crash saucers and things like that, and that stuff doesn't seem to actually exist.
Well, I mean, all these people who are now getting into the UFO, three-ring circus. There's this guy, Jay Stratton. He's the new figure in the Disclosure show. He was apparently, he's being marketed as a UFO hunter, but for the U.S. government. He is one of the characters that are mentioned in the book Skinwalkers in the Pentagon. they use the alias Axelrod. So he's the one who I think his wife saw the werewolf-like entity outside their kitchen, and apparently someone who attended the AlienCon conference, in which all these guys, Corbell, Knapp, Travis Taylor, all these people, they had a panel, and Stratton, I think, mentioned something that even Mick West wrote in his notes. Mick West also attended, that according to Stratton, Raytheon Technologies is, working and investigated with recovered materials from something. He didn't specify it was recovered materials from a crashed UFO or thing, but he said something to the effect of recovered materials that to do really cool stuff.
Of course, we don't see evidence of this either.
No. Like you see, what I'm getting with this is that the story keeps recycling just with new characters. So instead of Philip Corbell, now we're going to have Jay Stratton, we're going to have Travis Taylor, we're going to have Jay Blakatsky, and all, or Gary Nolan, all these people who are talking about, these programs that are. What's interesting is that this idea is starting to seep into the mainstream, not in the terms of pop culture, like the things that we've been talking about, but being mentioned in newspaper articles like the New York Times and such.
So someone had posted, here it is. Someone posted into the Where Did the Road Go group for this YouTube, it doesn't have her name on it. Who's pranking Sam Harris and Eric Weinstein about UFOs? Mm-hmm. And the title of the video is "Conning the Intellectual Dark Web." If you're a member, you can just go find it on the YouTube, on the Facebook page for Where Did the Road Go. But the woman who's talking about it is a skeptic, materialist sort of person. From what I got, I kind of skimmed through it. But most of it is her just using other people's podcasts to show what these people are saying and then commenting on it, which is fine. It's just that's all it is. And so I'm like skimming through it, and here are these people going, I've been promised that soon they're going to take me to see a UFO and prove to me that alien life exists. And it's just like, wow, we've been hearing this for so long from so many people.
Yeah, but this is something that I mentioned to you guys, I guess to you and Octavian, that this Eric Weinstein character, he was in one of Joe Rogan's latest shows. It was an episode that lasted 4 hours. And he said basically that he was kind of like being promised to get into the sanctum of the government U.S. UFO program, but I think he wasn't impressed about that because he said there's none of those people talk in the language of science. They keep saying, well, this stuff defies the laws of physics, but they're not physicists. So he was impressed, and that's why he now thinks that the U.S. government is actively faking UFO stuff, UFO stories.
Oh, okay. All right. Huh. I didn't know that part of it. That's interesting. I mean, that's what I figure is probably going. So one of these little groups in the government is doing this, and but at the same time,
Weinstein seems to be convinced that there is something to the UFO stuff aside from the fakery.
And of course, this woman asked the question that we've asked many times. She's like, "Why do these people think that they would be the ones chosen to reveal this to mankind?"
Right.
Tom DeLonge is so special that we've picked just him to give this information to, not a reporter, not, the news media, nothing like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Eric Weinstein has also a huge ego. I mean, he considers himself to be like the next Albert Einstein. Like he thinks that the world owes him a Nobel Prize.
Really? I don't know much about him.
Yeah, I don't either. But that sounds like somebody who would, believe they're special if they're told. Yeah.
Speak the terms intellectual dark web.
Yeah.
Intellectual dark web. You and Jordan Peterson, buddy.
Yeah, and he created this like theory of everything. I don't remember the name of the theory, but what I read about it on Scientific American and other articles is that no real self-respecting scientist takes it seriously.
Yeah.
And he complains like, well, these scientists, these eggheads don't take me seriously because I haven't published it in a peer review paper. And I think that he just recently did that, but they still don't take him seriously.
Yeah.
And to be clear to everyone out there listening, all three of us, I believe, unless I'm horribly mistaken, fully believe that there is a UFO phenomena that is not related to military or anything like that, that there is a very real phenomena at work here.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely. And it's been happening for a long time.
Yeah, for as long as we know,
And I think it gets more intense at certain points. It would be really interesting if we could figure out exactly what that was and not just Mars's proximity,
And my conviction is that people in the government, maybe they have more evidence that proves that UFOs are real, but they are as obfuscated and as baffled about it as we are. Maybe they are even more baffled because these are people, like we were saying, they have a different mindset. They are bureaucrats. They are people who have to follow red tape and orders and a hierarchy. So the idea that people like Tom DeLonge and Corbell, they thought that, by knocking into the doors of the Pentagon, that they will find the secrets of the universe, is to me totally ridiculous. What makes us think that these people know, they have the keys of the universe when, they're just running this stuff, they're running the show and they're trying to maintain the status quo. And UFOs, on the other hand, they are so anti-status quo by nature, So they are so absurd in their behavior, in the way that they affect people's lives, and transforms people's lives, and how they have no regard for government structure, government authorities. So why we keep waiting for the government to say, "Oh yeah, UFOs are real."
Right.
What we should be doing is just forget about the government and just look for the answers ourselves. Even if we don't have the resources, that doesn't. Nothing prevents you from trying to, establish contact with this other by yourself. Jeff Ritzmann said many times, you want to have an experience. There are ways to do so. And doesn't involve some government contract or a CRADA or a need to know, non-disclosure agreement. You can just go and if you have the balls for it.
Yeah, or you can do what Terence McKenna said, and since Josh isn't here, I won't try to do the voice, but take 5 grams in a darkened room, and you'll meet some extraterrestrials. Yeah.
All right, that seems like a good place to stop. Where can people find you, Red Pill?
They can find me at the Pentagon office, second level, behind the basement. No. Not kidding. They can find me at the Daily Grail, dailygrail.com, and they can also find me at my own personal website, absurdbydesign.com.
And Chris?
The basement of the Alamo is where I stay. Or brightrectangle.com.
All right. Thank you both.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
I'd like to take a moment here to thank all of my patrons, because all of you help make this show possible. And I want to give a special shout out to those of you pledging $10 or more: Billuminati, Chuck Shutters, Leanne Cherry, Matt in Delaware, Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Indrid Cold, 36 Dingo, CJ, Tim, Andrew Nichols, Matthew Sproul, Christine, a blue second-gen MR2 drifting around a Japanese mountain, Patricia Guy Quinta, Alex Whitcomb, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Ann Wintowski, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Big Boy Limina, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, Land of the Crazy and Communicable, Chris, Craig Cicernos, Craig Parmenter, Diane B., Empty K, Eric Todd, J. Otto Bullet, James Lattimore, James Lindsay, Jim and Sophie, John Bracken, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Schreck, Cool Kitty, Kristen L., Laser Printer Jam, Lauren McLean, Linz Jackson K., Luke Osborne, MJ Armstrong, Mark Brady, Mr. Weird, Oli Andre Olar, Patricia W., Paul Jeffries, Ray Benedetto, Riker and Stark, Ron Dupre, Sam Sharon, Seed Person 1, Stacy Sherwood, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, Thunderboy, Tyler Glimstead, Vincent Trewell, Walker, Will Gebhard, Craig Sagastumi, Will Powell, Ren Collier, and Caroline Walker. Thank you all so very, very much. There is a short Patreon-only segment with Chris and I following this conversation that'll be out later this week. And highly recommend Nick's book if you want to delve deeper into this subject. It's a very, very well done research on Roswell. All right, and I'll see you next time. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.